area with the lake and Sioux City's pretty quick, but I love that. I'm a Midwest guy.
Are you? Yeah.
Well, I grew up in outside Chicago.
Okay.
It's all farms. It's all farms.
Oh, okay. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thanks. Good evening. Good evening. If we could call the meeting to order, please. Welcome to the August 10th, 2023 Louisville Planning Commission meeting. And if we can start with a roll call, please.
Recording in progress.
Good evening. Welcome to the August 10th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. If we can begin with a roll call, please.
Commissioner Howe.
Here.
Commissioner Moline.
Here.
Commissioner Basket.
Here.
Commissioner Krantz.
Here.
Chair Brown Eyes.
Here. Thank you. With that, motion to approve this evening's agenda.
So moved?
Second?
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. And then we'll look back at our July 13th, 2023 minutes. Do we have any alterations, changes, corrections anybody would like to offer? Seeing none, a motion to approve the July 10th, 2023
I'll
minutes.
move the adoption of the minutes.
Thank you. A second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain.
Thank you.
Same.
Commissioner Krantz and Commissioner Moline abstaining, which I think will still meet. Yeah, that'll carry. Thank you. I'd like to open up the floor now for public comment for items that are not on this evening's agenda. If there's something you wanted to speak to that is not on the agenda, we would welcome that at this time. If I could ask somebody to double check our online world. Thank you. With that, then we'll move into our first item of new business, a minor subdivision at 301 Spruce.
Thank you, Chair.
I'll go ahead and read the script for you. I will now open the public hearing on a request for a minor subdivision of 301 Spruce. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. The procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, there will be a presentation and testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to staff. Next, we'll have a presentation and testimony by the applicant, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to the applicant. After these two presentations, members of the public who have joined this meeting in person, by computer or telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak is asked to complete a speaker card if you're here in person. Use the raise hand function if you're participating by computer, or *9 if calling in by telephone. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes per person. Pooling of comments is not permitted. The purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony and not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff will then be allowed to make a closing statement. I will then close the public hearing, and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. The Planning Commission will discuss the matter and may approve with conditions, deny, or continue to a future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and confirming your town of residence. Does anyone participating in this hearing object to the procedure I've described? Seeing none, do we have notification?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Do any planning commissioners have any disclosures regarding this item? Seeing none, take it away.
All right, so yes, this hearing item is for the Louisville Heights Replat B, which is resolution number 15, series 2023, which recommends approval of a minor subdivision at 301 Spruce Street, and as noted, public notice was met as required. Just a couple of slides on a little bit of background. This area is part of the Louisville Heights addition, which was platted in 1904. And then replat A, since this is replat B, replat A is just to the west of the subject property, and that was platted in 2008. This is also subject to the Old Town Overlay Zone District, and it is zoned residential low density, so RL zoning. The house that's currently on the lot, it was also, I think 1908 as well. Yeah, was built in 1908. And the Historic Preservation Commission earlier this year recommended the structure to be landmarked to City Council. And so were the Planning Commission to recommend the subdivision to Council, then those two applications would go concurrently. So Council would review the landmark and the subdivision together. That's an image from 1948, the assessor's card, and then we have a current photo today. So the request is to divide what's currently one lot into two lots, and there are three modifications that are requested in order to do this, and all of them relate to lot 2, so that would be the lot that doesn't have the historic structure on it. So they are to allow a lot size that is less than what is required, to allow a lot width that is also less than what's required, and then to allow a minimum lot area for lot 2 where 7,000 square feet is required. Happy to talk through the numbers as well. And then you can see the yellow outline is what's currently the current lot dimensions, and then the red line is what's proposed. So in terms of analysis on the modifications specifically, staff finds that this conforms with all of the other requirements of Title 16 except for the 3 modifications that are being requested. And then our analysis is that we support the modifications for the following reasons. So we find that the modifications support the comprehensive plan and the preservation master plan, which both contemplate the preservation of historic buildings. This would maintain the density that's currently there. It would also help to maintain the character. So even though this is a change from the current lot size, as shown in your staff report, we find that this is actually relatively in line with the lot widths and the lot sizes in that block overall. And then this also relates to the unique physical condition in the form of an existing historic building. The modifications to allow a smaller lot 2 would allow that larger building that you saw in the pictures to remain intact. And of course, this was built in 1908, so it had nothing to do with the applicant's needs. So with that, staff recommends approval of Resolution 15 Series 2023, and I just want to clarify that there are no conditions attached to this recommendation. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have them.
Thank you very much. Open to questions. Commissioner Howe.
Thank you, Chairman Brown Eyes. Thank you, Amelia. If approved, will both lots be compliant with current building setback codes?
Yeah, so in the process of this, the applicant created a site plan that's not part of the plat, but sort of to show that the lot 2 could meet, sorry about that, the lot 2 and lot 1, that they could meet the required setbacks per the Old Town Overlay. I'm not sure if the front setback of the historic home, but that's sort of neither here nor there because it's already, existent.
I guess that was what I was alluding to, is that it seems like in the photo that you put up, the line is pretty close to that building, and I assume that building's going to stay intact.
Yes, it is, and we reviewed that at the time, and I unfortunately don't remember what the actual setback is, but it meets the required setback.
Side setbacks, right?
The side
Yeah.
setbacks is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Commissioner Howe? Yeah.
Additional questions? Commissioner Krantz.
Yeah, I had one question about, for Lot 1. The lot description for the landmark proposes a lot coverage. I think it was on page 14, there was the lot data, and it proposes a lot coverage of 40%, but if I'm right about which code, it was 171250, it should be 30%. So for a lot area greater than 7,000 square feet, it should be 22,454 square feet or 30%, whichever is greater. So I'm just wondering if when they propose a building on that site, if they'll be able to meet the requirements. I think that what's in that lot area what's shown doesn't meet the requirements, and if they're going to keep the existing garage, I'm just wondering if that would be difficult to put a building on that lot that conforms to the square footage and
Okay.
setback requirements.
And just so, you mean the lot that doesn't currently have a structure on it, like that eastern lot? Is that what you're asking?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, I'm just thinking the one that, the first one. The first one that doesn't have a garage, if they add a garage. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I think it would be helpful if you don't mind, to
Yeah,
pull
yeah,
up
of
that
course.
page. It's on page 24.
I can do that, yes.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure.
No, that's okay. So I can answer that the actual zoning for lot coverage would be the Old Town overlay. And so it's not the Title 17 zoning.
Okay.
This is going to take me on a journey. So let me try to
No, that's
answer your
okay.
question.
If I'm wrong about this, if I am wrong about the applicable zoning requirement, then there's not a problem. I was just looking at, it says on the bottom of that, on page 24, it refers to 171250, and that's what I looked at, and it's got the wrong numbers from 171250.
Okay. So I'm sorry I can't pull that
If
up.
you
but
prefer me to.
It would be, happy to take a look at that, and maybe we can take the applicant's comments, and then I can double check what you're referencing, so that's a little easy technologically. But I will say, it's the Old Town overlay that would be relevant, and then also this would be a landmark, so they're subject to different lot coverage, higher lot coverage allowances,
okay.
because it would be landmark. So I think one of the two of those things would probably cover what it is that you're concerned about, but I can certainly double check that.
Okay,
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like it's a big issue. I just noticed that, and I wanted, it would be good to double check it before.
Yeah, and honestly, that's a great question for the applicant as well about the garage specifically. So the existing property, even if it were above the allowed lot coverage, it's already existing. It's been there for, in its current iteration for at least 50 years. It's over 100 years old. So that's not something that would really concern, creating that kind of situation, but maybe asking them if they've explored or they're interested in a garage and how they plan to approach that. But once they landmark it, they'd be subject to whatever the maximums are for the landmark for a lot size. So I think all that would be covered. If
Okay.
I also think it's a good question to ask them about the garage on the other side, on lot. Well, now I've got confused. On lot 2, it's my impression that they intend to demolish it at some point. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, good question for them.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, can we invite the applicant up? If you begin with your name and confirm your town of residency. If you can come up to the microphone, though. Oh, okay. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Susanna Pels, and I've been in Louisville since 1985, and we currently live on 556 Grant Avenue. And it's a lovely street, but the house we have there is a bit large now that the children have left home. And this was my mother's house. She purchased it in 2010, and I inherited it. And we would like to keep it in the family. We love the house. Everyone I think that has lived in the house in the past love it. I know one of the granddaughters who used to go there and see the grandmother that lived in that house years ago, and she lives on Grant Avenue. And our goal was to keep it in the family and build a house on the side that would be more retirement for my husband and myself, more downsizing. And we thought it would be really nice to be able to have 2 houses together that our children could inherit if they want, and keep it in the family for a while. And that was our goal. And about the garage, I was under the understanding that if we did put a garage on the McKinley Street side, that it would go in under the historic registry. It was explained last year that you get a different lot size. You're allowed to do a little more square footage when it's a historical home. So I don't know. I don't have the details on that, but that was what I understood. But at the moment, we're not planning to put a garage there. And our first goal is to subdivide and build our own home for retirement. And is there anything you want to say, Dennis? Okay, I'll let Peter up. So unless you have any other questions for me, I'll let Peter take over.
Thank you.
Hello. Good evening, Peter Stewart, Stewart Architecture, 1132 Jefferson Avenue. And yeah, it's, the lot coverage, the floor area ratios are governed under the Old Town overlay. And it's a little bit odd in that the one lot is going to be landmarked and the other one's not, so they have different standards. But we did go through those calculations, and what's there now certainly complies, and there was enough space or enough allowed lot coverage and floor area ratio to make the garage and the house work on both properties. Now, the newer property is on the eastern lot without, that will have that has an existing garage, which may or may not stay. You know, that house will be limited in floor area and lot coverage based on those calculations. So, and I don't have all those exact numbers, but I'm thinking it was like 2,500 square feet above grade for the house with the garage.
Commissioner Krantz, would you like us to bring that up on the screen, the relevant code?
Sure, it sounds like the only thing is that I think that the code that's listed under the lot coverage table still says 17.12.050. So it sounds like it might just be the wrong, I mean, just so that I don't feel really ridiculous, I think on page 24, it might just be the wrong code that was referenced.
Okay,
So
we'll look at that. Yeah, I'll look at it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Just for the record, we did review the code, which I have up on the screen now. So for a landmark bonus, you can see you are allowed up to 40% for lot coverage. And then here's the site plan for the proposed lots and the table that was included showing compliance.
Thank you so much. So the footnote on the bottom of that table, would that be incorrect then?
The reference to the section of the code?
Yes.
No, it's just a different subsection under that section that references the landmark bonus, but it is a correct reference, I think.
I apologize
No, that's
for
okay. It was a good
holding this up. I
clarification.
was looking at the wrong thing, and it's all correct then. That was my only question.
I have a question of staff regarding the width. I'm guessing that not all of the lots in that area are 70 feet. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, so in your staff report, that table included the lot widths, and most of them, off the top of my head, I don't remember, but most of them were around 50. And so again, not really sure what the average is, but yeah, definitely a lot of them are way below 70.
Right. Okay, great, thank you. Additional questions of the applicant or staff? Last chance now. All right. Thank you all then. I'll now open it up to public comment. If you would like to speak. Do we have any cards on this one? Yeah, we have one. All right. Thank you very much. And if you begin with your name and city of residence.
So I'm Marilyn Patel. This is my husband Yvon. And we live in Louisville. We actually live across the alley from this. So across from lot 2 there. The east side. On the east side. And we're sympathetic to the Old Town overlay restrictions. We don't have a garage ourselves because of this. And we're not totally opposed to the request. All of us would love an extra lot, right, when we're doing. But we do have some concerns we'd like to understand. First, it seems like 16 feet less in width is a large amount, right? And we're worried that that will have a cascading effect of other variance requests between the necessary site clearance when you're leaving an alley and the garage that's there and the 16 feet taken off. It seems like this could lead to so many constraints that it gets closer and closer to the alley in the front and becomes a very constraining structure for the rest of us. And we also notice when you change the orientation, these lots usually run the other direction here. You're changing them to north-south. That already pushes everything closer to the alley, right? Because now this side setback is an alley instead of a street. If we add on to that, we would like not to end up with another looming something on a very small available space. But our main concerns are just those, that that's 77% of the normal width, which seems like a big reduction, and that it may cause a cascade effect for whatever's built there next. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming out. Any additional public comment on this item? We double check Zoom? No? All right. Thank you. Does the applicant wish to address anything raised by the public comment in a applicant response and closing statement?
Hi, Peter Stewart again. Yeah, I appreciate the comments from the neighbor. You know, even if the lot weren't subdivided, it can still be developed further. And even when it is subdivided, it'll be developed within the standards and guidelines for the new building. The lot width, you know, that was brought up. And from the table in the staff report, you can see that that lot width is pretty consistent with the overall character of the neighborhood. So I guess in that respect, it's not out of character with the rest of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a staff response and closing statement, please?
No, thank you.
All right. What's that? Oh, sure, yeah, well, we can welcome you back up here. We need you at the microphone, though. Yeah.
Part of the house. I'm pretty sensitive to the historical part of the house as well. I mean, we've lived in this area for 15 years now. So, I mean, just to add a comment about the fact that, I mean, from a historical side.
Hey, sorry, can you speak to us, please?
This house has been, I mean, again, around for more than 100 years now. And so, as, you know, living in this neighborhood and with a lot of old houses, I feel like definitely changing, I mean, you can see like this lot number 2 would even cut on the deck and the garage. I do feel definitely that would affect that historical part of the neighborhood and the house. So just to add to this, so that's all.
Thank you. I will now close the public hearing, and then planning commissioners will deliberate on the evidence presented. During deliberations, no further public comment or other testimony or evidence will be received. Who would like to begin this evening? Commissioner Krantz, can we start on your side this
Sure,
time?
no problem.
All right.
Yeah, I love the idea of preserving the historic structure, and it seems like a really great idea to for the city to make a compromise in order to keep our values of preserving old structures. And I know that the applicant is not required to preserve this, and if this gives them incentive to preserve it, I really like it. But I do want to at least acknowledge what the public comments were saying, and I think it would be useful just to take a look, if we could, at the picture on page 6 that shows how it fits in with the neighborhood, just to rule out the concern about a cascading effect. So that's something I wouldn't mind discussing a little bit more.
Can we ask you just to pull page 6 up on screen as we continue our deliberations? Thank you. Commissioner Baskett, your thoughts on it?
I am not concerned with the width of the lot. I think that it's a challenge to the architect and the homeowners to stay within the requirements as well as respect their neighbors. Sounds like they've lived in Louisville for a while, so they're part of the culture of the community already. And I think that infill housing is very much needed and appropriate for this location.
Thank you. Commissioner Moline?
Sure. My comments are pretty consistent with Commissioner Baskett's. I think in my opinion here, we have a win-win. We've been talking about housing, and here's an opportunity to gain one unit and do it in a way that preserves a really important historic house in Louisville. So I'm going to be supportive of this and appreciate the property owner coming forward with it and the historic preservation Commission for taking a look at this as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Howe.
Yeah, I think this is beneficial to downtown. I am sympathetic with some of the public concerns, the neighbors' concerns. Looking at this map, it seems like there's no house right up next to the alley. I guess I would have a bigger concern if the house was right next to, and then there was another house directly adjacent to it. I think as long as the setbacks are consistent with the codes, the city and downtown codes, we should be able to preserve people's privacy. And I think the lot size will also control the size of the building itself. So I don't think we have to worry about a very, very large square footage house because of the size of the lot to begin with. So hopefully with those restrictions in place, that will put at ease some of the neighbors' concerns and help people move forward. But in general, I'm looking forward to approve this.
Thank you. I also find myself in favor of it. I certainly appreciate the concerns and also appreciate, right, it's hard. You've been living close to a very kind of oversized lot and you get used to it, right? It's understandable that you'd perhaps prefer to have it stay as is. And yet it really isn't that. I don't find it to be all that inconsistent with the neighborhood myself too. And for any number of reasons, particularly preserving the historic house that is there and that they're going to landmark it, I think that is very significant for the city. So with that, I would entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion for approval of resolution number 15, series 2023, a resolution recommending approval to the minor subdivision, the Louisville Heights Replat B.
I'll second that.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Howe,
Yes?
Commissioner Moline,
Yes.
Commissioner Basket,
Yes.
Commissioner Krantz,
Yes.
Chair Brown Eyes.
Yes, the motion carries. Thank you all for your time. Let's see, 7 o'clock, moving on here. We will move to our second item of new business, the concept plan review process. I will now open the public hearing on a request for our concept plan review process. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. The procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, there will be a presentation and testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to staff. Next, after this presentation, members of the public who have joined this meeting in person, by computer or telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak is asked to complete a speaker card. Use the raise hand function if participating by computer or *9 if calling in by telephone. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes per person. Pooling of comments is not permitted. The purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony, not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff will then be allowed to make a closing statement. I will then close the public hearing and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. The Planning Commission will discuss the matter and may approve with conditions, deny, or continue to a future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and city of residence. Does anyone participating in this hearing object to the procedure I've described? Seeing none, do we have notification?
Yes, Chair Brown Eyes. This is a public hearing. All public notice requirements have been met.
Thank you. Do any Planning Commission members have any disclosures? Seeing none, request
Right.
for the
Good
presentation.
evening again, Chair Bronice, members of the commission. I'm Rob Zuccaro. I'm the Community Development Director for the city. I'll be presenting on this item. So before you this evening is a resolution recommending to the City Council approval of a new section in the zoning ordinance to create a concept plan review procedure. So this is something that the City Council has asked us to work on here in 2023. It's included on their work plan, something they've been discussing for a while to add to our development review process. The idea is that it adds a new step. It's supposed to be an expedited, quick step at the beginning of the review process before someone makes a full application, before a landowner or developer spends the time and money. They can get in front of City Council and try to get some clarity on policies, make sure they're going in the right direction before they make a full application. I just want to note a couple things. Again, this is just a way to get in front of City Council to see where there are areas of concern or areas of interest by City Council. It shouldn't replace any processes for developing city policies or standards for development. That's an important part of a concept plan review. We need to still have good public process and transparency in developing city policies. But sometimes policies conflict or there could be different interpretations. This is a really great opportunity to get in front of council and get some of that clarification. So the way we've drafted this is there are certain eligible application types. So the idea also isn't that minor type applications are going to be in front of City Council. It's really bigger, more complex projects. So we've identified this list. It includes general development plans, which basically creates most of the zoning standards for those types of properties. Those are properties zoned planned community zone district, large properties under single ownership being master planned. Planned unit developments when there are multiple lots or height or density waivers. So those are the main big policy issues that somebody might be asking for. Special review uses, comprehensive plan amendments, but only if they're specific to development of a particular property, as well as zoning map amendments or zoning text amendments, as long as they're specific to the development of a certain property. So we've tried to narrow it down to those types of applications. So the process, in summary, again, we want this to be a quick process. When somebody submits to the city for a subdivision plat or a final PUD, that's usually a 6 to 9 month process, and there's lots of planning and investment that has to take place. The idea is this is a 1 to 2 month process. Staff isn't doing an in-depth review of code or policy compliance. We are anticipating when it goes to City Council, though, we might identify relevant policies, plans, documents that they should be looking at, because there's a lot you have to wade through to know maybe what's applicable to a certain type of application. So the code has some things that we would expect to see as they're relevant to a particular request, a narrative of what they're proposing, any type of preliminary site plan, sketch plan, site data. I think it's also important to know the surrounding conditions. So there's a lot in there about, well, how does this connect to the surrounding transportation network? What are surrounding land uses? That could really influence some of the comments they might get, as well as character sketches if they're, to see what any buildings might look like. This would require public notice so that it is, again, an open and transparent process. So we're following the same public notice requirement as we would for any type of public meeting for a land use case, and there would be public comment taken in the same way. I think this would be a benefit both to council as well as the developer to hear preliminary feedback from the public. So I think it's a good part of the process. Council members would have the opportunity to ask questions and make comments individually. The idea is that they aren't prejudging, they're not voting, they're not coming to consensus necessarily, but I think that's an important part of council not prejudging any part of the proposal and just kind of giving their preliminary, getting their preliminary questions, comments in as it relates to any city policy or plan. We did provide a little bit of background documentation. I wanted to mention that from some other communities. There are quite a few communities that have concept plan or sketch plan reviews. We provided attachments to those and a little bit of a summary. I did want to note that planned unit developments in these communities are probably quite different from our PUDs. They're probably closer to general development plans that kind of create the zoning, larger master plan developments. But again, each of these communities, it's really focused on bigger, more complex type projects. Some communities it's optional, some it's required. You'll also note that depending on the city, sometimes you're going to both Planning Commission and City Council, sometimes just Planning Commission, sometimes just City Council. So, and then most of them have required public notice. Arvada was the one exception. In this case, just as for a little explanation, we did recommend going only to City Council. And you know, part of the reason is I think it's important to Planning Commission and City Council, or sorry, Planning Commission and staff to understand maybe what City Council's viewpoint or interpretation is of certain policies or what their focus is. So it also helps expedite it. I think if we did a Planning Commission and City Council back-to-back process, that would extend the timeline, and we're trying to keep it short. And I think that could be an important part of the process as well. So with that, staff is recommending approval and would be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Director Zucchero? I'll start with one actually. So in this, if this happened and somebody came to City Council and then they came back around for the full submittal, they would come, as current processes, come to Planning Commission. Would Planning Commission at that point then be aware of any of those discussions previous?
The idea is that the meeting minutes from that discussion would be included in the record. So you would be able to reference the meeting minutes, which would summarize all of that discussion.
Great, thank you. Additional questions, Commissioner Basket?
I had a similar question. Would the sessions be, have a video recording as well that we could watch?
They would have a video recording. I think if Planning Commission was interested in those, and I think it would be a good way to do it, is we could include that in the packet so that all of the commission had access to that video. We've actually done the opposite recently for City Council. They've asked to have the video of your deliberations, and we've recently started adding those to City Council memos, so we could do the opposite on this as well.
I think that would be very helpful.
Yep.
Commissioner Marlene?
Yeah, I might have a couple questions, but one, and by the way, we received some comments that, do we need to make those?
Yes,
We'll
I
get
forgot to
those.
mention that. There was
Yeah.
there were no comments in the packet, but we did get one comment letter this afternoon. It was up at the dais this evening. It's hanging on the board for the public as well.
One of the comments is on that is triggering a question for me, which is why wouldn't we require some kind of feedback?
So typically, so I think we've thought a lot about this, and this is the reason, these are some of the reasons why. Again, this isn't, we don't want this to be binding in any way. We also don't, usually these cities don't make it so there's a consensus vote. There shouldn't be a vote because that's leaning way too far into prejudging the application. So some council members may have no questions. They may have no comments. They're really just listening. Again, it provides an opportunity for comment if council wants to provide comment, but it doesn't force them to, because honestly, a lot of these applications also may have limited information and for council to respond to. So I think compelling council to make comments, that every council member would have to make individual comments at the very least if we did want to go that way, because there is no consensus voting, and there's probably going to be potentially dozens of topics to weigh in on. So then do they make comments on each relevant topic or just general? So we could consider it, but I think when you look at the example ordinances, they're usually pretty clear, and one of them was really explicit about no comments are required, just so council doesn't feel compelled if they truly have no questions or comments to make.
Was there an additional, Commissioner Howe?
Yeah, I think this is a good idea, but the more I think about it, the more I have questions about it. I think there's definitely a tiptoe, like a two-step that we're doing. We're saying, hey, we want this to make things more streamlined, but we don't want the city council necessarily go overboard, and so there's a little bit of a fine line there. So I guess my concern is that we know that city council meetings, we're talking about them being on record and videotaped. So how can we encourage open discussion? Because that's really what we want on this. But as you said, the binding, how do we keep it from being binding? And I think that's a really tricky thing to do.
Yeah, that's always one of the considerations with these concept plan processes. They're quasi-judicial. When they actually make their final application, you really have to, it has to be, you know, the council needs to be considering the evidence in that hearing. And so you really want to make sure that there's no actual or perceived prejudging of the application. So that's why we drafted it the way we did. So if you look, we give guidance within the ordinance on what council should be weighing in on. That's one of the sections of the ordinance. And I didn't go over that in my presentation, but I can bring that up. It's really focused on existing plans, policies, and ordinances, and how this might relate to those, and additional information they might want. Community care, you know, considerations for the specific character of the surroundings, those types of things, just so the applicant knows, oh, well, this is important to city council, like this pedestrian connection's important. You know, you're next to a residential area, you need to be really considerate of noise, for example, more than maybe a different area. So those types of things might come up in the deliberation. But again, they shouldn't be prejudging based on any of the actual criteria.
So how do we limit that? I know you have guidelines, but would you stop a city councilman if they were saying, yeah, I'm not in favor of this? I mean, of course you don't, that's not something they should be saying, because then that gives judgment to.
They would be, so the city attorney would be at any of these meetings,
Okay.
and she would help make sure that all the comments were appropriate. I imagine that there would be, especially the first few times we did this, there would be a lot of, you know, having the city attorney explain the guidelines, explain the parameters, and there might be a few interruptions, you know, from the city attorney saying, hey, that might be going a little too far.
And then if I can ask another question, if that'd be okay with everybody else. So that I'm just trying to think through, right, like what some of the outcomes or sequela could be. So the concept plan discussions, now they're not requiring council interactions, but they would be summarized. That's another topic I'll talk about later. And in that summary, they could use that summary in their presentations to the public, citizens, boards such as us. For example, mayor, whoever it is, what was concerned about this, and we took care of that, and by saying ABC, or they seem to be in favor of this because they really like this open space. I mean, I'm just bringing up hypotheticals. I'm not saying that that's the. But am I wrong in assuming that the things in that summary could be used in their presentations? Let's say they had a public at the library meeting, they could use that summary.
That's correct. Yeah, that would be part of the public record. They could present that. I think we would all be considering that, staff as well as the Planning Commission. I think it's also important that, you know, there are 7 individuals on council, and we're going to be getting individual input. And so everybody will have to be taking that into consideration as well. One council member may feel very strongly about something, but it doesn't mean that the majority do. So that's, you know, the pros and cons to all these things, so it's something just to be aware of when we're reviewing the information if we have this process.
Commissioner Moline?
I'm curious, Rob, having cut my teeth on looking at sketch plans in Douglas County a long time ago, I'm just curious, was that ever kind of a consideration of, let's just reinstitute a sketch planning process that would be more traditional, bring it back through planning commission? And I realize that applicants probably would be concerned about, oh, geez, really? Another lengthy process that may or may not yield a lot of results. I'm just curious, as part of your putting this together, did you think about that again?
So, I mean, I think this is supposed to be a sketch plan process, and
Okay.
I'm not familiar with the Douglas County
Sure,
process.
yeah, no, yeah.
And if, but the idea is that we drafted it to city council. A lot of cities, they take it to planning commission, and they just get that feedback. Maybe that's similar to Douglas County?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Instead of going to city council. Again, I think it just depends on what that city wants to achieve. I've also seen cities where sketch plans or concept plans go just to the planning commission.
Right.
We could do that as well. I think then they're certainly getting, this body's interpretation of the same policies.
Mm-hmm.
I think city council's has the final vote.
Sure.
So there is some value going
Yep.
straight to council.
Yep.
So I think we could either, if we wanted it to go to planning commission, I'd probably recommend a two-step process, similar to what City of Boulder has, where council could call it up. I think they must be reviewing them and have the ability to call them up, or Arvada and Broomfield, they both go to both bodies.
Okay. Thanks, that was very helpful, Rob. I'm just sort of trying to piece together sort of why the sketch plan term has fallen out of favor and we've moved on to this kind of concept plan. But yeah.
I use them interchangeably. I think
Okay.
generally they're interchangeable with
Okay.
different cities. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Very helpful.
Commissioner Basket.
Rob, could you help me understand a little bit on the staff process that's relevant to this? I haven't walked through this with you guys before, so what about that?
Yeah, and let me explain a little about our development review process outside of the concept plan. So all applicants are required to have a pre-application meeting and review with city staff. So before you even make a GDP or a PUD or a plat application, you're required to come in, meet with planning staff, public works, building, economic development, fire district, police, public safety. So we get all the people in the room, we hear what they're saying, we give them preliminary notes on things to be aware of. We've tried to further clarify the application process and requirements. And so we do have a staff review process, and then somebody can actually apply for their PUD or GDP or SRE, all of these things that you can apply for. Then they can apply for that. So we have a separate process where an applicant is actually required to, and I will say informally, if an applicant comes in and they have questions, we'll meet with them informally even before that pre-app, whether they want to meet with Public Works, and we'll give them preliminary feedback the best we can. So with this process, because we want it to be expedited and we want it to be really kind of a quick conversation with council, we're recommending that staff is not doing an in-depth policy ordinance compliance review, because I think that would really slow things down. It would really bog things down. So with the concept plan, we're just saying, okay, they've got a narrative, it makes sense, they've got concept plans. Staff in this case is going to probably say, okay, well, we're going to put a bunch of documents in the packet for city council. We're going to say, here's the comprehensive plan, here's relevant sections, here's the transportation master plan, here's relevant sections to be aware of. We'll try to give them a list of relevant codes and policies so that they can just kind of zero in on their review. And there could be other things but we'll do our best. There may be other policy documents we're missing, but we'll do our best to kind of give them everything that's probably relevant. And then it's really up to the applicant and city council and the public to have that initial conversation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's quite specific. So Rob, what with the addition, if concept plan process moves forward, what would be the order? Would you have the pre-application meeting before or after the concept plan presentation to
That's a
council?
great question. So the concept plan is, the way we have it drafted is it's completely optional. I think that it could, we haven't drafted it either way. I could see it happening in either way. I think an applicant could choose to do it before the staff pre-app. If an applicant came and did the staff pre-app and they were like, wow, there's a lot, this is complex, there's a lot to consider, maybe I want to go do the concept plan. So I could see it happening in both ways.
Commissioner Krantz.
Yeah, everybody's questions are really helping me a lot. I was just curious too, it sounds like this, if I'm understanding this right, it sounds like it's going to add a burden on city council and on staff. And the benefit to the applicants could be great if it really does streamline the process. So I'm just wondering if, I've got two questions. One is if you could explain, well, maybe let's leave it at this one. How can you explain how we know this will streamline the process and how much we think it could cut down, like the kind of things that we anticipate avoiding?
Right. So, and I had mentioned streamlined, and what I had meant was that this process is intended to be streamlined in and of itself. It could add extra time to the development review process overall for an applicant. I think theoretically, it could also make the certain applications go more quickly because there's less ambiguity about potential city policy. So theoretically, it could be a little less work on staff and the applicant, but that's to be determined and probably case by case.
Okay, can I follow up on that one a little bit? So I was kind of imagining that this would shorten, that this would potentially avoid some pitfalls along the way, so that would shorten the overall process, but that's not necessarily the case.
Well, I think it could. I think it could in certain applications. For example, if staff and the applicant spend several months going back and forth, discussing policy issues, this could eliminate some of that. It could also eliminate an applicant getting in front of Planning Commission and City Council and getting continued or remanded. It could limit that happening in a lot of cases, I hope.
Additional questions?
Just real quick, did you consider for certain types of applications making it required? Like something that was requiring a comprehensive plan amendment or annexation or something really large?
I think we did consider that. Some cities do that. There's pros and cons to that. I think, I would mention too that our city staff also spent a fair amount of time talking and interviewing architects and land developers and saying how would this work best in your view? And I think some of the feedback we got is they probably wouldn't like required, just because it could add more time, but giving them the option would be preferred because then they have the flexibility. But we could do it either way. Some cities have it required, some cities have required public engagement. We don't have that. But that's just a preference for our community.
Commissioner Howe.
And just one more question. Thanks, Director Zaccaro. I think I know the answer to this, but when proposals have citizen or public outreach and they will do a presentation, are city council members allowed to attend as a citizen?
Typically, no. Once they're, because of the quasi-judicial restrictions,
Right.
They really wouldn't be able to attend.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I was trying to sift through that. Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Baskett.
Director Zaccaro, I wonder if you could make any response to the letter we got from Mr. Hartmanfit.
So essentially,
Yes, I mean, so there,
considered public, I mean, procedurally, it's considered public comment. We don't have to
yeah.
directly address it but.
If you had a
there-
specific, I mean, if you have specific questions about any of the recommendations, so the public comment we got has some recommendations for changes to the ordinance. So if you have any questions about those, I could, if the chair and the commission would like, I could respond.
Was there any specific ones in the letter? So I think Jeff's question kind of addressed the fourth bullet point.
Okay.
You're welcome to. That's totally legit. There's no problem with it. Okay. All right. Commissioner Krantz.
Yeah, you gave us a good idea that, that you surveyed applicants and people who might be, building, that they like this idea and that they'd like it to be optional. Did you survey your staff? How do you feel? Do you guys feel really good about this? Like, it sounds like it's adding additional work.
Yeah. Yes, I think this, we have been talking to the city council from the staff level about this concept for 4 or 5 years, about, do you want to add this? This could add some value to our development review process. So I think from a staff level, it's, when we hear about what, how council and our community would like the process to go, it's something that makes sense to staff, something that we've been asking council for several years if they're interested in.
Additional questions? Seeing none, I'll open it up for public comment. Do we have any speaker cards on this one? Excellent. As we do so, so is it going to be a addenda 3, and then the email we received today, will that be, so as far as entering the comments we received into public comment?
All
how do you
of them
want us to
together,
refer-
you mean?
Yeah, how do you want us to refer to them?
Let's do addenda 1 through 5 now, because I didn't have.
Okay, and then we'll do the
that
same
previous.
addenda 1 through 5 for our next item.
Well, I
Because
think you could probably do them at once.
there's a couple crossovers.
Yep, I see
For
what you're
each
saying.
item.
Yep, so
Yeah.
maybe let's do them all together, 1 through 5, because it's to one packet anyway, and since there are some crossovers.
Great, all right. So as we do that, I would entertain a motion to enter addenda 1 through 5 into the public record.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none? Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, Sherry Summer. I live in Louisville. I can see the reason behind doing something like this. A developer wouldn't go way down the road, you spend a lot of money on plans, get to council, and then get voted down. They get a little better orientation. So I can see the end, but I'm not sure that I am clearly understanding how the process would work to get to that end. And one other comment, we mentioned speed, but I just want to know that it would be a good process. And I know that people have thought a lot about it, so these are just my comments that I'm making. I wonder, first of all, if it'd be more relevant to have to have Planning Commission review these applications more than council, because your expertise is more on the technical side. And you can also take public comments. I am wondering why this would be, so these are just some questions. I'm wondering why this would be superior to staff feedback. I am also concerned with Commissioner Howe's comments about how this process could sway, could affect the way development proceeds, could even very carefully questions could be interpreted in ways that could be considered to be binding. I guess my greatest concern is that public opinion really needs to be consulted, and it needs to be very put in front of the public, because council could review these applications, they could not see any glaring problems, but if the public doesn't give feedback at that point, there still is potential for problems down the road. I don't know how much it would actually help if you don't take public comment at this point. So I think in my mind, the most important thing, rather than would it be in front of planning or council, would be to be sure to have enough public input to make a valid decision, for the developer to make a valid decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional commenters on this topic? Can we check online on the Zoom to be certain?
I checked online, there's no one with their hand raised.
All
We
right.
have one more comment card from Josh Cooperman.
Excellent. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Josh Cooperman. I live in Louisville. I'd just like to make some very brief comments. In general, I'm very supportive of this concept plan idea. In particular, as I understand that as it's drafted at the moment, public comment would be taken when City Council reviews a developer's ideas. And I think that's great. I think one of the great things about this idea, besides having council provide feedback, is for the developer to get feedback from the public. And the developer, in general, could get feedback from the public in other ways, but they might not, they might not be able to get feedback or all the feedback they would like, and this provides an additional opportunity for them to get feedback from the public, which I think is something that's a little bit lacking in our process, especially towards the beginning of someone putting forth a development. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional? Yes. Okay, so yeah, we can welcome you up into the podium. You can fill out a card afterwards if you would, please. Thank you. With your name and city of
Good
residence.
evening, I'm Stephanie Schlageter. I own 916 Main Street. I'm a new business owner downtown, and I just wanted to add the comment that...
Sorry, just city of residence.
Oh, I live in Boulder.
Thank you.
And I think this is a great concept. I have been working with our amazing city staff who have helped me immensely with the development of my new purchase. I don't probably fit the bill of what's being described here. I'm not a large development, but in concept, I can tell you that somebody who is looking to invest or build in Louisville, for me, there would have been really, really huge benefit to sorting through all of the opportunities and regulations and provisions and everything. There's a lot, and I've navigated it kind of like on a bumpy road, and I think that this concept would be very, very beneficial to anybody looking to develop big or small business in Louisville. I really think it'd be great. The one thing that did concern me is that 1 to 2 month expectation, because also time is always of the essence, and I would hope, to your point, that it would help expedite the process down the line if you got a few things understood and laid out and crossed off the list in the initial concept review. So those are just my concepts, but my comments, but I think it's actually I have thought all along, I wish I knew so much about all the stuff I'm dealing with at the beginning of the process, and I really do think it would have streamlined a lot of things for me. So that's my 2 cents.
Great, thanks. And if you can, the cards are available just outside on the table. If you could fill that out, it'll assist the staff in tracking all of that. Any additional comments? While we have public comment still open, regarding the process and public comment during the city council hearing of this, essentially, can you clarify?
Yes, so there would be a round of public comment, same as this meeting here, where any of the public could weigh in at some point in that process for 3 minutes. So I think it'll be just like that. Yep.
Thank you for confirming that, yes. Additional questions before we close public comment? Seeing none, all right. I will now close the public hearing, and the planning commissioners will deliberate on the evidence presented. During deliberations, no further public comment or other testimony or evidence will be received. Looking to my other side, where are we at?
Thanks, Chairman Brown Eyes. In many meetings that we've had, they've cited summaries from other boards, whether it's open space or parks or sustainability. And they tend to be too succinct, too brief. And so I'll often go in and read what the minutes are. And the message is often much more convoluted and complex than maybe the summary would be. So I liked the discussion that we had, that we would have, or people would have the ability to look at that discussion that City Council would have in this concept plan. I think that's important because a summary sometimes doesn't reveal all of the discussion that was going on. My biggest concern, just building on some of the public comment, is would the concept summaries or comments or discussion overshadow or influence the quasi-judicial process? And I hope this wouldn't happen, but I can expect it to, where someone would be standing up here in front of us saying, we met with the city council with the concept plan, and they didn't have any questions, and they were all kind of nodding and pretty much in favor. Well, we can't. They may not have said that. So how do you objectify rather than subjectify those comments? Or vice versa. Let's say they say, let's say there's a question about some code that goes the wrong way. It just seems like that there could be some influence there where their word would affect. And let's say they say, yeah, they had questions about this, and here are the changes we made. That would really help us. That would I would agree that was streamlined, and that's what I would hope this process would. So I'm trying to decide between that streamlining and the benefit versus the potential to overshadow the quasi-judicial process.
Thank you, Commissioner Moline.
Yeah, I ultimately, I think I'll be in support of this, and I really appreciate the time and effort that staff has put into thinking about this. I'm a little mixed on whether I think in the end this is going to provide a lot of value. I hope it does, but it seems like there's a number of off-ramps that somebody can decide whether to do it or not. And then there's, how much information will an applicant gain by going through the process? So at least I can't quite visualize how much value added is going to come out of it. But I'm also I'm trusting in the staff and that council has put this on their work plan for a good reason, and I'm willing to. I don't see any real downsides to it. So I see myself in support of it. I'm just still a little bit fuzzy on how much value we'll end up getting out of it. I hope a lot. And I referred to sketch plans a little bit earlier, and those were more formal, took more time. I kind of appreciated those from a planning commission perspective. They provided a little more information. You had a sense of how something was going to develop. But I also understand that probably meant a lot of additional time and money spent from a development perspective, from the developing perspective. So I understand the kind of reluctance to add a lot of, you have to do this and you have to get this and you have to go to a planning commission meeting. So anyway, that's a lot of speaking for just being in support of this generally. So
Great, thank you, Commissioner Moline. Commissioner Basket.
Well, I think that it's great that this is proposed as an optional process, so a developer can be proactive. I think it makes us a little more business-friendly to allow a developer to get some firsthand input and direction from City Council so they can figure out if they really should pursue their project or not and shape it to be the feedback that they receive from council and hear the public feedback that they would also have. So I will be in support of the concept plan.
Thank you, Commissioner Krantz.
Sure. I also find myself in support of it, but I share a lot of Commissioner Howell's concerns. But I was probably not being as familiar with the process. I wanted to confirmation that I'm not being naive, that what it says in our packet, that we can set very clear expectations, that nothing in this would be binding. I think that if indeed staff is confident that that can be done, and we'll have the city attorney there, I feel pretty good about it. The only thing that I think is that if this really is indeed such a good idea, that the city council put this on the work plan, staff has spent years coming up with this idea. I actually think that for some larger projects that have come before us and there's been a lot of confusion, I think that it would be good to have this as a requirement for certain really large projects that have a big impact on our city, because that way I feel like there will be less misunderstanding between the public and the developers and the city about what's coming on. And I think it might avoid some problems by making it required.
Thank you. I also find myself in favor of it as an optional, actually. I appreciate the thought that, well, that is the goal, right, is that we'll avoid some of that. But I don't feel like we need to make it required. I think probably most would realize it's likely in their best interests. So I think we would tend to see that more often. I think when development and politics meet, it gets really messy really quick. And essentially, this is an opportunity to provide kind of an airing out of some of those thoughts and concerns kind of early on. And yeah, no, it's absolutely non-binding. As commissioners, when it came to us, it would be clean plate, and we would be able to go any direction we wanted with any angle on any issue, absolutely. So even to contradicting what had been discussed earlier, it would still be our purview to free speech to bring up any issues we wanted to. So that part I actually feel fine with. But maybe I'll get in trouble with city council, so we'll see what happens next. That said, I would call for a roll call vote, please, or motion. Well, we're gonna need a motion, aren't we? Motion for Resolution 14, Series 2023, municipal, no.
Is it resolution number 16?
Series 2023, concept plan review process regarding the establishment of procedures and criteria for a concept plan review process.
Sorry, before you make the motion?
Sure.
May I just, is there a way to, I understand that we didn't all discuss, it sounds like there's consensus that nobody wants to make it a requirement, but is there a way to make it a strong recommendation that for large projects, they should engage in this? I mean, I just felt like we had one large project that there was a lot of misunderstanding on, and if we're going to go do this, I feel like would there be a way to make a stronger recommendation without requiring it?
So I wish we had discussed that more during deliberations.
Okay, are deliberations closed?
Barely.
Okay,
So
let's, you know what, that's okay.
But no,
That's
so,
okay.
so
I'll just leave that for the record, that I think it would be highly recommended.
Why don't I step back a little bit, and why don't we discuss that a little bit further? Yeah, let's take it on. So what are other people's thoughts? Let you all begin with. So the thought that we would, first challenge is what is defined as a large project. So that's not included in any of this. Personally, I find a strong recommendation to be actually not enforceable. So as much as we might want to encourage future people to do that, it still doesn't require that they do it. So I don't know. What are other people's thoughts?
Yeah, I'd echo that as to, I think the question is, well, how big is big? And then how do you measure the impact that it could have? Maybe small projects could be having a big impact. So is it big or small? I think that would be really hard to judge. And I'd almost like the flexibility. Maybe I think it becomes more friendly to people looking for approval to have the option to do this or not.
Commissioner Moline, thoughts? Commissioner Basket?
I would be concerned that if the Planning Commission indicated support for a mandatory process, we would be perceived as putting more burden on development, and I would not want to do that.
Thank you. Commissioner Moline, your thoughts? Just in casual deliberations here?
Sure. Yeah, I would rather not, I think, see a requirement just for some of the reasons that we've already spoken about or have.
Okay, yeah, thank you. It really helps me to hear everybody's voice on that, and I was, I think that makes sense. So, thank you.
Any other additional thoughts before we? All right. Excellent. Second, great. Do we have a second on the motion?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Howe. A roll call, please.
Commissioner Howe,
Yes.
Commissioner Moline,
Yes.
Commissioner Basket,
Yes?
Commissioner Krantz,
Yes.
Chair Brunice.
Yes. Thank you all very much for your time. We'll take a 7-minute break, reconvening at 7:55.
Thanks, everybody. That was good to see.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Thank you. I will now open the public hearing on a request for municipal code amendment dark sky lighting. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. The procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, there will be a presentation and testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to staff. After this presentation, members of the public who have joined this meeting in person, by computer, or telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak is asked to complete a speaker card. Use the raise hand function if participating by computer or *9 if calling in by telephone. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes per person. Pooling of comments is not permitted. The purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony and not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff will then be allowed to make a closing statement. Well, in this case, it's all staff. I will then close the public hearing and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. The Planning Commission will discuss the matter and may approve with conditions, deny, or continue to a future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and address. Does anyone participating in this hearing object to the procedure I've described? Seeing no objections, do we have proper notification?
Yes, Chair, we do.
And do any Planning Commission members have any disclosures? Seeing none?
I'll just note that I wasn't at the last hearing.
All right.
And, but I did watch the video.
Great, thank you very much.
And I also wasn't at the last meeting, but I have caught up by reviewing the minutes, by reviewing the packet from last time, and looking at all the materials that we've got to this time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay, yes. So just to clarify, this was continued from July 13th. And so I'm going to focus my presentation on the updates that we're bringing from the previous draft that you all saw in July. And then a little bit of information that you all had requested between that last hearing and this hearing. So I'll start with updates to option 2. So in July, the Planning Commission directed staff to look into option 2 specifically with the concept in mind of trying to create new thresholds or specifically, maybe decrease the triggers so that we'd get some type of more compliance. So we've come back with a few changes. And I've underlined addition and alteration here to keep my head straight about the two, but bear with me as I go through this. So one is to change the definition of substantial addition to capture the total square footage of an addition and not just the footprint. So the way it was written initially was anything out basically would trigger it, but now it's, if you have a second-story addition that we see a lot downtown, for example, this would still trigger that based on the percentage. And the next one was to revise the commercial and residential alteration threshold. So again, that's the materials change to down to 25% from 50%. So if you can imagine, a perfectly square structure, previously you would have had to alter 2 facades in order to trigger, and now you'd only have to alter 1 or 25% in order to trigger building compliance, so full building compliance for that structure. And then for the commercial additions, that threshold we also are proposing to bring down to 25% that would trigger site-wide compliance. So again, 25% out or 25% up would trigger site-wide compliance. And then finally, we also altered the residential addition, and we actually are proposing or recommending that this capture any additions. So any additions of square foot on residential would trigger site-wide compliance. So I'll go a little into some of the reasoning around these things. So first of all, like I mentioned, Planning Commission asked us to decrease the thresholds, and so we have done that. And then we also took into consideration the cost of residential lighting versus the cost of commercial. And again, that we talked quite a bit last hearing about trying to find a balance so that we weren't triggering, staff's recommendation, right, is to try to avoid triggering huge costs for small projects so that they're trying to get a little bit of a balance as much as we can. But we figured that residential lighting in general is lower cost, and it might not be necessarily lower cost for every single person, especially depending on what your income is or what your lighting, style and tech that you would like. But in general, that's a much smaller add to a project. And so that's the logic between the 25% versus triggering all for residential. And then also just to, we went back with our building permit team to try to understand, what are the really clear triggers that we have to work with. And again, just to reiterate, additions are coded separately in that process. And so this is certainly something that we could track very easily. It would be a staff add on the residential side. For commercial properties, we look at lighting plans commonly, but for residential, we'll be developing something were this to pass to add to our review for that process. But again, that's something that's pretty standard, and we feel it's reasonable for us to be able to add onto this process. And then I also wanted to give just a little bit of information. So I did go back and try to find some information in our permit data. It's not as clean as this makes it look, but this is my best estimate here. So looking at residential additions from 2018, so tried to go a couple years back pre-COVID to now, we've had 155, approximately 150, 155 that we think would trigger site-wide compliance. So had this been passed in 2018, we would be looking at 155 additions alone, right? That doesn't, of course, mean 155 new, because there's other types of triggers with replacement and and things going out. So that would be specific to the additions. The commercial addition piece is even trickier, but just looking at the permit set, what I was able to, I'd say it's probably about 20 that would have come in that would likely be triggered by this code from 2018 to now. And to be fair, that's basically the rate of commercial additions, period. So the 25%, again, this is a relatively rough estimate, but it's probably pretty close to the number of additions that have happened on commercial properties. So I do, we do think that the 50 going down to 25 would help capture, more than what we were looking at in July. Just a noting on the numbers that this is not a perfect number. So that's true for all of the numbers that I'm showing you. These are all our best estimates with the information we have access to. So then, we had a number of requests for additional information. And again, the caveat on these numbers, I'd say take these with the margin of error, and I would estimate, just having looked at a lot of these different things, these are probably somewhat on the lower end, but we've tried to get them as close as possible with limited information. So we're estimating that a residence with 3 to 4 lights on their house would, with labor, be looking at $750 to $1,000 total. Of course, that could be much lower if you're the type of person who has the courage to go and do electrical work, or you have that type of knowledge, or your system is such that it doesn't really need anything additional labor. But that's what we would estimate. And then we also did a walking survey, basically, of a couple areas and tried to extrapolate out how much compliance do we think we've had. And we estimate about a quarter of residents may already comply specifically with downlighting. And I do just want to provide this as a reminder and a clarification that, when we're looking and doing a survey like this, and this would also be true for enforcement on the other side of this, right? We can tell for residential pretty easily whether something's full cutoff or not. Visually, that's pretty easy to determine. But if you didn't keep the box for your bulb or the box for, we really can't tell super well what the brightness is and what the color is, right? Especially with the technology that would be available to us, but also in general, it's just sort of a tough thing to do without that additional actual paperwork, the kind of thing you get for new construction, right? So then on the commercial side, I've kind of divided what I could find by cost estimate, by project type, and lighting type. So here I have a little table, and as rough as these are, so we've got from Fort Collins a 3-story apartment that had under 100 parking spots, and to retrofit that whole system, some of it was already dark sky compliant and some of it wasn't, is my understanding. But the total cost for that was $76,000 for a full retrofit, all inclusive. Then looking at a 28,000 square foot office space, which also included parking, don't know how many number of spots, that was over $100,000 for a full retrofit that was all inclusive of the property. And then we also have a little bit of information about a smaller, something that you might see. So that kind of captures like your sort of bigger developments. But we do have an example of like a 2-tenant, 2 to 3, 1 to 3 tenant strip mall area. And that was a partial retrofit that cost $8,000. And that's materials only. So that doesn't include the labor costs. So that would mean, right, it costs actually a lot more to do. And then the other piece of information, is breakdown by lighting type. So these are materials only, but trying to take a little bit of a survey, we could estimate $50 per soffit, $300 per wall pack, and $770 per parking lot with a fixture only. And so we didn't do a walking survey of commercial, but just, again, having looked at some of these things, we're looking at between 6 and a dozen wall packs, right? So it's actually a little bit higher than I would have expected, but that's what those numbers are. So in the most case for commercial buildings, it's not going to be 600. It's probably, again, for wall packs alone, it's going to be in the thousands. Soffits there are more of them, but they're obviously lower cost. So, and then the parking lot fixtures obviously can, per parking lot fixture, that's the most expensive part. So then also just to kind of clarify the work that we've done thinking about rebates, right, and trying to figure out, were this to pass, really in any form, but certainly in the amortization form, what kind of rebates would be possible, and trying to look at other places and what they've done. So as I mentioned in the last hearing, Moab's really one of the places that has a pretty robust rebate program for residential, but it's funded through a private community group, so it's like Friends of the Moab Skies or something similar to that, and then it's administered by a consortium of jurisdictions, so it's the county and Moab, and it's a couple of other places. Then we also, and this is very much thanks to Commissioner Krantz for pushing these requests on more information on the rebates. We talked to PACE and Excel, and I would say we didn't hear back from Excel, so it's sort of limited information. But from an estimate of a recent project, about 50% of a $16,000 update project was covered. That was lighting and other improvements. But the PACE representative did note that the rebates are capped at $20,000 per parcel, and then PACE is generally larger than Excel. So in this case, I think they got about $6,000 from PACE. So that's just, again, because, to ask about the rebates. And then there's just two more things that I kind of wanted to mention. So Commission talked a lot last month about, what do these different compliance and programs look like from education perspective, and which option do they get triggered at, right? And so in any one of these options, in option 2, right, all of these would be a part of our programming. So amortization is not the only way that we would need education. So we would do potentially things like mailers to properties, letting them know, hey, if you replace your lighting, maybe that would be an annual mailing. We've done things like that before. Certainly store partnerships are something we could pursue. Not so hopeful about that piece, just because having done a community survey with that question, a lot of people buy their lighting online. So we don't really have as much control as we might imagine that we do over that. But certainly, again, the education piece could be helpful there. There are current programs on Dark Sky that, planning, we're starting to partner with other departments across the city. And so those are already happening, and we're working on, making those more robust were this to be adopted. We've had a web page up for many years, and we also, would have potentially a verification system for lighting for all permits. If you're coming in for a type of lighting, please verify that you are not adding any other lighting or that it's compliant, right? Little ways like that to capture more than just the, are you doing an addition or not, right? And then the final thing is just a compliance protocol. So, you talked a little bit about how could we be able to tell whether something was compliant or not when it's existing, right? Which would be critical to anything that would require that wasn't triggered by a permit, right, or new construction. And I think there may be systems out there to do that effectively that I haven't found or that I haven't heard from, but it is just very difficult, especially when it comes to residential lighting. It's kind of what I mentioned before. Fixtures, relatively straightforward. All the other elements, relatively complex to impossible, at least for us to be able to administer, and certainly from other places that I've seen. So again, just trying to give you the information that you requested and paint a realistic picture, if I can, about what any of these options would really look like. So with that, staff recommends approval of Resolution 14, Series 2023, specifying option 2 as drafted for this night's hearing. And I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have.
Thank you very much. Let the questions begin. Questions for? Great, thank you.
If I'm understanding this, this option 2, this revised option 2 that you're putting before us now, it does require all replacement lighting for residential to be dark sky compliant.
That's true of all of them, yes, new construction alone. It's new construction and replacement for residential
So
and
if
commercial.
if I were to, but how can you, there's not going to be any deadline which you need to comply? I see a scenario where you say, okay, well, I just ignore it and I replace my light with what I want, with whatever I think is the most decorative. And then there's nobody knows when I replaced it. So it seems to me that would be do you envision that being effective without a deadline for compliance?
I don't think the deadline for compliance would solve that issue. I think probably really that issue isn't solvable, except that we can just continue to dedicate education over time, which we would do for any of these options, because the replacement piece is true for any of the compliance options that are before you. And whether or not there's a deadline, it doesn't change the fact of if somebody goes out there one night, changes their light bulb or changes their whole fixture, we're still left with the issue, whether it's amortization or it's option 2 or it's new construction only. Does that help? Hope I'm saying.
Additional questions?
I have one, if no one else wants to go. Were you able to estimate the cost for the city to become compliant?
No. We were not, and I know that was something that was of interest, and I think, what I tried to articulate last month, and I think is still true, is that certainly if that is a really critical piece of information, we can talk about it, but that would probably require us to get an outside consultant to estimate the city's structures to actually be that specific. And for example, everything that I've presented to you, I've pulled from neighboring jurisdictions that have dark sky compliant things that, from years ago. It's been a really piecemeal process because it's pretty hard to get that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I guess I just would hate it to not fit into the budget. I'm sure it probably would fit into the budget somewhere. I'm not up to date with how tight we are with the budget, but that would be probably a deal breaker if the city couldn't afford to do that.
You mean if, yes, okay. You mean if it couldn't comply if they were out of compliance and the lighting broke down or something? Is that what you mean for option 2?
Well, I assume there's certain lights that the city needs to update to be compliant with this.
Yeah, I think so. We have talked to facilities. I will say, don't have the hard, helpful cost estimate numbers, but we had multiple conversations with facilities, and I think as we all know, this has been a conversation for many, many years. And so there have been recent lighting updates that have been dark sky compliant, and maybe they aren't exactly this way. I don't know that audit level, but certainly they're all downlit. They're all, lowering the brightness. A number of them are on dimmers, or they're meant to be on dimmers. So I would hope that we actually have more that would be compliant with this code than we might otherwise assume.
Thanks.
Commissioner Krantz?
To follow up on that question, from watching the city council hearing, it's my understanding that all of our streetlights are, at least as of 2021, we're in the process of becoming in compliance. So is it true that our streetlights are all in compliance except for the spacing of the lights and the pole height, that the fixtures themselves are all now compliant?
Yeah, so I don't know if they're compliant with this exact code, but I think that, I know you know this, but just to be clear, this wouldn't affect the streetlights for the reason that we don't really have control over the streetlights. So I do also want to see if Director Zucchero has anything to add about that piece.
Right, I was just going to note that this ordinance would be for lighting on private property. Public property would be exempt. The streetlights that we did put in, we did work with Excel to make sure that they were cut off, back shielded, no more than 3,000 Kelvin. I don't know what the light level for a parking lot light would be equivalent to this, but we did take consideration into it, but we can't do compliance because it's not included in the code. We can't estimate compliance.
Okay, and didn't the city just, wasn't on the budget proposal that was presented at city council to update the lights at the ball field? That would also be city property that this ordinance would not apply to, but just for the cost.
Can I actually clarify? I'm so sorry. It's streetlights that are exempt. City, as it's written now, city would have to comply with this. Yeah, sorry, just for the clarification. So for example, the ball fields, just because you brought that up, yes, right? Whenever those need to be updated, or like that would be part of what's covered here. But it's just specifically streetlights that are exempt because Excel owns them.
Listen, could you share, I think this might answer Commissioner Howell's question and mine too. Could you share with us how much, what the budget proposal was for the ball field lights to be dark sky compliant? I understand they got a 50% off discount from Excel. And would that give us a ballpark idea of how much it costs? I just saw that in the budget packet.
I'll try to look that up, what the budget estimate was, but it included both the lights as well as the lighting systems. So I don't know that the budget reflects exactly what it would cost. We haven't reviewed the lights for compliance. I just know they're updating their lights. They had mentioned they intend to be compliant with the dark sky code, but again, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe like 500,000. I'll try to find the exact number. And again, it was the lights as well as some complex systems to operate the lights.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions of staff? Commissioner Basket.
So if we can think back to the original options that you presented, you obviously had done a great deal of research about other cities and other ordinances. So I don't know if you can remember the percentages that were in the other options versus the percentage that we're looking at tonight, where the other cities fell into that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So previously we had 50% and 50% as our thresholds. And I think I would say that these thresholds are more something that we kind of came up with through having conversations with our community, and not something, because our original drafts, we've gone through many iterations before it came out to public, input, and a lot of those conversations and that original draft, actually, I misremembered, I'm sorry. Our first public draft had a lot of triggers that were use-based, and that's actually what's more common in other jurisdictions, is like if there's a use change or there's like a tying it to a type of development review. And I think probably that, Louisville, as we've talked about before, it treats PUDs a little bit differently than other places. It treats some of these developmental processes differently. And so maybe that's a reason why it's not a great match, because a lot of our processes aren't actually related to development occurring, right? You get a GDP approved long before you get even close to building something out, right? So that's potentially a reason why there's a gap there. But this is something we came up with to try to meet people where they were actually making change on their property, rather than using what we had mostly seen, which was, like I said, the use triggers. So.
Just to get the exact number, since there was the question, the request for funding for the sports field LED lighting conversion was $250,000. And then it was being offset by grant funds, but I don't have that number.
Additional questions, Commissioner Howell?
I want to go back to a comment that we made, or build on a comment that we made last time in a request from myself and Commissioner Beckett. We had talked about the exemption of the downtown area. Can you help, downtown Louisville, can you help me understand, I guess I should have asked this question last time a little bit more directly. Help me understand why that exemption's in place for downtown Louisville. Sorry, Commissioner Basket, I mispronounced your last name.
Yeah, so just a reminder, so the downtown area is subject to all of the requirements, like brightness and foot candles and all that, but it's not, to the brightness and the color and all those pieces. It has tighter restrictions on brightness, so lower than what would be allowed in other commercial areas, but the thing that it doesn't have is trespass. So it's exempt specifically and only from the trespass requirements. And the reason that we are proposing that is because of the topography of downtown and the built environment of downtown, not the topography, the built environment. And so, I'm looking at Commissioner Moline. Anyway, so, and right, because, you can know this from being downtown, but this is also something that we heard a lot from business owners, right, was it's very difficult to have something that's not trespassing onto a residential property. And there are mixed uses downtown, and there are, which admittedly would be sort of a separate process, but there are also areas that are residences, a couple blocks this way and a couple blocks that way. They're kind of mixed in with the commercial. And so it's effectively, I mean, our thought is it's effectively impossible to actually have trespass be regulated there, just because they're so close together. And I will also say, I mean, this is something we went back and forth about and we looked at, and I've been outside and taken measurements at the alley and thought, okay, is this even possible? And another layer to that is, let's say in a perfect world, somehow it were possible to limit the light. It's actually super hard because of how bright downtown is in general to tell which light is not compliant, right? So there's a lot of layers to it, and it's really out of appreciation and respect for the downtown built environment, and also just with, again, trying to respect that piece. But I will say, the fact that we don't have trespass, that we're recommending not including that, is why we have a lower lumen max in downtown. It's trying, again, to balance that because we think that's probably more realistic, right?
Commissioner Basket.
So following on to that conversation, downtown residential blocks, much like the suggestion we had in one of the public comments for competition between blocks, a sub-area of downtown could decide proactively to make their block compliant. So it doesn't prevent anything from happening. It's still, I appreciate your clarification as downtown is only exempt from trespass. I think that's really important to note, that the fixture replacements would need to be compliant.
Yes, absolutely. They would need to be compliant, and not to restate, but they would need to be compliant with all the pieces. They would have lower lumen levels. It's just the trespass, so the light shining from one property, from one lot onto another, that they'd be exempt from. And to be clear, residential would be exempt from that trespass as well, but the only thing that residential has a trespass limitation on is any downzone, so agricultural open space of a certain size and such. So in downtown, that's still really, there's really not a lot of areas like that in downtown in that area anyway. In fact, there might actually be zero. So it's not really, it wouldn't actually have an effect on the residential piece at all, in terms of what they would be required to comply with.
Well, I was the one that was talking about it quite a bit last meeting, and I'm much more comfortable now understanding what the intent is around the different components of improvements.
Thank you. Additional questions? Did I cut you off? No? All right. Additional questions? All right. Thank you very much. We'll now open it up to public comment. I imagine we have a number of cards that we can call people up on.
All right, I'll start with two. The first person will be Rich Curtal.
And as we ask you to come up, I think we'll go ahead and we'll enter addenda 1 through 5 again to public comment for this hearing, knowing that there's some crossover in some of those. Motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Oh.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Thank you. Is that first person available? Rich? Oh, Cindy Bedell? We'll welcome you up anyway.
Card, okay. Maybe.
Oh, you didn't? Okay. All right, great. Well, surprise, you jumped to the front of the line. Thank you. If you could begin with name and city of residence. Is it? I'm not, no, I don't think so. The button at the bottom.
Can you hear me now?
There we go, thank you.
So I sent in an email with an example of some dark, or not dark night skylighting, but I just wanted to make a couple quick comments. I think that this option 2 change is a step in the right direction, but I still think that we should try to have some kind of compliance for existing residential and commercial. Otherwise, it seems like we'll have very little impact on our dark night sky. I think residential to residential light trespass should be included, and I understand the difficulty when it's a high-dense situation or mixed-use situation, but I think we should give it an attempt. And maybe you didn't get my email, but I sent it last week. It should be in the packet. So I took some pictures when I was out riding my bike at night, and in some of the new builds south of Harper Lake, there's some gigantic, I want to say 4 or 5 foot lights, and they just trespass everywhere. So I couldn't imagine living next to that residence and trying to get some sleep. I think some of the adjustments that we're asking of residents could be really simple, like just pointing the lights down, setting the motion detectors only for our own property, and they don't go off when someone's walking by on a sidewalk and triggering a floodlight that blinds somebody, or when they leave their floodlights on all night. And I think I saw something in the ordinance specific to floodlights, but as someone who walks or bike rides at night, some of the most egregious problems are these really bright floodlights pointing out, both commercial and residential. So some of these adjustments would be pretty simple. Just reach up and point it down and adjust the motion detector. I know other things would be a little more expensive, like changing a fixture, but changing a light bulb would be very simple. You know, going from an 80 or 100 watt down to a lower watt. I'm going to run out of time. And I just wanted to say, I think we could do compliance through education and maybe start with a public information campaign like IC was commented on tonight, or maybe a fair where we hand out discounts at local hardware stores like Ace or Home Depot, show some sample fixtures and give some literature. So I'm just very pleased to see this effort to preserve our night skies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Josh Cooperman,
Then can we also say who's next?
John Webb,
Excellent.
Josh Cooperman, I live in Louisville. I think as most of the commission knows, I am in very strong support of a dark night sky lighting ordinance. And I think the staff has done an excellent job with this ordinance. I'd like to make a few comments. The first two are short and pertain to some recent comments, public comments that you received in writing. First of all, I would say that, people have security concerns about lighting at night, which are completely valid, but that has nothing to do with dark sky lighting. You can have lighting which is dark sky compliant and meets all of your security needs. It's just about designing it appropriately. Secondly, there have been some comments about, how much of an impact will this ordinance make on our dark skies? And quite frankly, the answer is probably not very much, because we do get a lot of sky glow from neighboring communities. But I don't think that's a reason not to do this ordinance. Boulder did a similar sort of ordinance more than 15 years ago, which admittedly is maybe not that successful. But I think Louisville could do a better job than Boulder. And we could set an example in the area and hope that other communities will follow suit. And maybe we can even, we've even tried to come up with some sort of creative ideas for compliance. And I think it would be great if other communities tried to pick up on that. And then in the future, we would have darker skies in Louisville and the rest of the area. Okay, I'd like to put in one more plug for the correlated color temperature of the lighting. I just like to sort of clarify, it's true that the Dark Sky International, or formerly International Dark Sky Association, certifies lights up to 3,000 Kelvin. And also the American Medical Association says that lights should be 3,000 Kelvin or lower. If you look at the Dark Sky International's materials, they would actually prefer a limit of 2,200 Kelvin, which is pretty low. Well, I mean, it's good, but it is hard to find lighting at that temperature, as I understand. So I would really like to see us try to do better than 3,000 Kelvin. I think 27,000 Kelvin would be a good place, a good maximum. And then perhaps we could have some kind of waiver which says if you can't find lighting at 2,700 Kelvin, or if it's super expensive or something like that, then we can give you a waiver. to go up to 3,000. But I think if we just say 3,000, every single light is just going to be at 3,000, whereas lower than that would really be better. All right. Finally, I'd like to comment on compliance.
And yeah, I don't know if, was the clock running? I wasn't watching. No, okay. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. All right. So, yeah. So I understand that this is the most difficult issue with this sort of ordinance. And so on the one hand, I think it's worth remembering that at City Council's discussions of not this ordinance, but just dark sky lighting in general, a few years ago, the direction was definitely to pursue amortization. And I know that our City Council has changed since then, but that was the direction as I went to those meetings, and that was what I understood to be the direction to city staff, was to pursue amortization, and as I recall, preferably on a timeline of less than 10 years. That said, you know, I think the compliance issues should reflect what what our community wants and wants to achieve. I'm not really sure what our community wants to achieve. I know there's a segment of our community that wants to get all of our lighting in compliance in a relatively short amount of time, and I would count myself among those people. At the same time, I agree that we don't want to just throw out, you know, lights that are functional. So I don't know. I'm not quite sure where I fall on the compliance issue. I do kind of favor an amortization period, and I liked the creative ideas that staff had around that. I certainly support what they're proposing at the moment with the substantial additions and alterations. I just don't think that will get us as far as the amortization would. But in any case, I think the most important thing is to recommend that we pass this ordinance because we want to get any new lighting into compliance and any replacement lighting into compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. And then also while we're having somebody else, come on up. And then who's after that? Great. And then can we double check Zoom at some point? To see if there's anybody who's, no? Okay, great.
Good evening, members of the Planning Board. My name is John Webb. I've lived in Louisville 30 years. I'm currently serving as committee chair for the Louisville B City Committee, subcommittee of the PPLAB Parks Public Landscaping Advisory Board. And we're trying to promote conservation of native bee species as well as other pollinators. Tonight I'm speaking in favor of our night flying friends and cousins who do a lot of work for us, both in pollinating, recycling biomass, and also as an important part of the food chain for other creatures. I sent an email to Amelia back in June just to propose some support for this particular lighting ordinance moving towards dark sky. And in the B City Committee, we have all approved this memo that I'd like to read to you tonight. I think the ordinance is a good idea, not just because it will reduce light pollution, and I think will actually improve community safety, but also because our night flying insects don't do well with the current lighting practices of the modern city neighborhood. Many of these night flyers do important pollination and biomass recycling tasks that can't be accomplished during daylight hours. I recently viewed a webinar produced by the Xerces Society for Conservation of Invertebrates, where the hazards of modern lighting to night flying pollinators and other insects were described in detail. This webinar is entitled "Turn Out the Lights for Fireflies and Other Insects," and it's available on the YouTube channel sponsored by Xerces Society. I urge members of the commission to take a look at it if they have a chance. Our worldwide insect population and species diversity is threatened by herbicides, pesticides, habitat loss, and habitat fragmentation. Nighttime outdoor lighting only increases the hazards to the 60% of insect species that are active at night. Humans and our ecosystem depend on insects for pollination. They're a critical element of the food web, are responsible for biomass recycling, and they could be entertaining and educational if we only take the time to look and listen. Imagine a summer night without the sound of crickets and katydids. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Sherry Summer, Louisville. I would like to advocate for better compliance, potentially through giving more choices, more options, and not just the option of amortization versus new construction only, but at our last meeting, we talked about less expensive options for compliance. And Commissioner Choi advocated for those, and I totally supported his comments. Tonight we saw the cost of a full retrofit, but Commissioner Choi talked about things like motion sensors or timers on lights, particularly in parking lots. I really appreciate how responsive the staff was to so many of the comments in the last meeting, but I didn't see that. I just think that we're such a high-tech society that something like as low-tech as just turning off your lights. Like, I don't ever turn on my porch lights. I consulted with the police department, and they have Scott Moore came, and he told me a lot of things that we could do as residents to keep our house safe without having lights on. So it's like not having bushes in front of your door and making it look like like Sherry lives here. It's much more safe, and lights are not the only answer. So I'd really like you to consider that. And those lights that are existing may not be 100% dark sky compliant, but overall, wouldn't it be a win if we could get more people to do this? I mean, I'm just talking about like quantity of people. If businesses were like, well, that's not so expensive. It's not as, $80,000 or $100,000. We could just put a motion sensor on that. I really would like to advocate for getting more people engaged by giving them more options. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional?
Next will be Catherine Smith, and then the last one is M. Christensen.
Hello, I'm Catherine Smith, a Louisville resident. And I just want to say I want to thank the staff and the commission, because I really see this as an example of the whole process working. And I know that the staff has put a lot of effort into what you have before you, and I think the changes are positive. I would like to see more changes, but I do want to recognize the effort that has clearly gone into this. I'm an advocate for the darkest possible skies, and I was looking at the numbers that we have, and with 155 residences having additions in 5 years, the change is really symbolic as opposed to substantive. And I was curious about costs. So today I went on to Home Depot's website and saw that for $29.97 you can get a modern black LED solar outdoor wall cylinder light that says it's dark sky compliant. So I looked at that and I thought, well, okay, so for $60, I can replace the lights that I have with something that's solar powered. It might not be the best light, and that might not really be a realistic option, but then I looked at hardwired lights, and again, on Amazon, the prices were at the low end, $30.99, at the high end for a European design fixture, $130. And I recognize some people have more exquisite tastes than that. And so they might choose to spend $1,000 on a light fixture, on just the light fixture. But I do think it isn't terribly expensive for people in the residential areas to upgrade. And for people for whom it really is a problem, I think that we saw our community come together as part of the Marshall Fire response and look for ways to, for subsidies, for tax incentives, for various ways to allow people who were challenged financially to come up to code and beyond code. So if it's part of what the staff would do here, maybe before this gets to city council, if we could have more detail about what options there might be for people with financial constraints. I want to say I agree with all of the comments that I heard tonight. I just wanted to say a little bit about, because I think we underestimate the importance of sun and sunlight and the circadian rhythms. As humans, we are very much attuned to light, and that is not unique. I was surprised to learn that plants are particularly attuned to light, but I probably shouldn't have been because they photosynthesize. And then I started to look a little bit into like the health effects and saw that diabetes, heart issues. I think we just have a very preliminary understanding of the effects of light on life. And that anything we can do, this is sort of a cumulative thing. We have herbicides, pesticides, we have, we're just changing the environment so much, and anything we can do to reduce the impact of humans on the environment, I think is really all to the good. We are going to be facing an environmental crisis. We're going to see species declines, and lights, frankly, are going to be part of that. And then I wanted to talk real quick about enforcement. I really appreciate everybody's thoughts that we have to have something that's 100% enforceable, but you know, when we put up a stop sign, we don't say we're not going to put up a stop sign because we can't afford to have a cop at the intersection all the time to make sure that everybody stops and they come to a full stop, and we don't have California stops. We put up the stop sign and we say people are gonna mostly follow the rule, and if there's a bad accident, then we're gonna investigate and there's gonna be penalties. I'm not advocating for penalties here. I'm just trying to make the point that it's okay to put an ordinance in place without having the world's best enforcement mechanism, because the compliance that you get advances where we are. I don't think we should do wink, wink, nod, nod, like we have an ordinance, but. And there was somewhere in the comment process somebody saying like, this is a very stick-oriented approach, and I do agree that we need to look at ways to educate the community and ways to make this maybe a little more fun and not quite such a serious endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, you are standing there. Thank you. All right, keep that on the board for me. Thank you. Hi, my name is M. Christensen. I live in the city of Louisville. I'm speaking through a sign language interpreter tonight. So at the last meeting, I heard both sides of the story and listened to the discussion. I really like Commissioner Howe's part of the discussion, you know, separating it into different sort of options, considering the different pieces. I really like option one. It does sound like, you know, punishment heavy, and I like the changes that have been made. I think 3-year expansion for some of these, you know, kind of an amortization strategy sounds good. But for the Small Business Administration, to encourage them to sort of work with small businesses, right? Work with the business community to have, you know, motion censored lighting and so forth, to kind of help them strategize some ways to, you know, put safety first in the lighting sort of retrofits and so forth. But I think the 3-year plan can be expanded a little bit, you know, to provide a little more time for people to come into compliance. Also, I think, you know, looking at the type of building that is using a certain type of lighting is important. I think also looking at, how the outside lighting is used and whether it's, say, under an eaves or not, and I think giving that plan some time to be able to allow business owners to be able to become compliant. Maybe the 5-year plan expands to some other types of building, other types of businesses, maybe not small businesses, but larger businesses. As far as parking lots are concerned, I think that it's important that we look at safety as a number one thing because that's why we have parking lot lighting. If the building is being renovated, do we expect them to go ahead and just dump a bunch of money into the lighting? What's the priority there? I mean, I think that looking at that as, a punishment for non-compliance may not be the way to look at it. Perhaps they separate it into parts of the parking lots and they revise, a part that's, say, the most important part right next to the building first, and that would be the first phase of that lighting retrofitting, instead of having strict compliance and punishment for not having done it all at one time. Maybe they could fit into, the 3-year plan and the 5-year plan in phases of the parking lot lighting retrofits. As far as the 25% sort of improvement on a property or lot is concerned, I think that, when there is a plan to have these additions be made, I think that they, homeowners and business owners should be encouraged to sit down with city staff to discuss how they're going to make these lighting changes over the sort of term of the additions to their building envelope. I think that also a sort of further point is that the city should really try to partner more heavily with Excel to encourage Excel to recognize that we are trying to work on dark sky initiatives as a part of how we run our city. And not just expecting Excel to come in and partner with us, but there's other cities that, may have taken a similar kind of approach, been told no by Excel, and then they say, okay, well, that's where we're going to end it. But I think that that's not necessarily where we need to end it. I think as a city, we can reach an agreement with Excel to partner with them for these changes. Thank you very much, commissioners.
Thank you very much. Do we have any additional?
Not at this time.
No? All right. Double checking online. Nothing online? All right, great. Thank you. Do any commissioners at this point have kind of additional last questions of staff? And then we'll move into deliberations, but after we close public hearing, we're no longer open to questions for staff, so.
I have a quick question for staff. There was a public comment asking about incentives for, and we talked about the PACE and the Excel. That summarized everything?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, all right. Oh, yeah, please.
We talked a lot about the incentives, and I just want to make sure that's not something that needs to be in the ordinance. Is that something that can be done by the city later?
Right, exactly. Yeah, we wouldn't recommend putting it in the ordinance. We'd put it as how to enforce it or how to enact it.
Actually, Commissioner Kentz, while we have it open, can we enter your little widget there into public record as a little show and tell?
Yeah, I just wanted, I brought this in because I went to make my lights dark sky compliant. I live in a residence that has 4 outdoor lights, one that's been there since the 1980s and has never worked. And so I ordered this on Amazon. It's a dark sky compliance cup, aluminum cup, and it costs $20, even though it doesn't look like it's worth that. I was able to just bring one more thing.
Bag of tricks, this is cool.
Yeah, I'll just do it really quick. It just, I know this is exciting as I unbox it. It just fits over the light bulb, and it works for a bigger light bulb. And so I found out that if I put this in here, you just screw the whole thing into the fixture, and it makes your light dark sky compliant without having to do any rewiring. I thought it was kind of cool. What I found out, though, is that after I put this into the fixture, I was able to make my light dark sky compliant by simply using a smaller bulb, because this one doesn't extend beyond the edge of the fixture. So I was able to save this for another light on the front that I can put this on, where the bulb does not, the fixture only comes up to here. It doesn't make it a very pretty solution, but I wanted to share that. And
Thank you. Yeah, very cool. Then actually, if you want to just pass down the widget.
Sure.
Thank you.
Do we need to put that into the
Yes, we
public
can
record?
enter that in the public record.
Motion to place in the public record.
Thank you.
Do you still get to go home with it, even though it's in the public record?
Yes, yes, she does.
Hey,
We
if
have a
somebody else
second,
needs it, they're welcome to use it.
a second on that motion, please.
Second.
All right, thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Thank you for bringing that up with us. All right, that said, I will now close the public hearing in the planning
Chair,
commission.
I'm so sorry. May I make a closing comment from staff?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Sorry, thank
That's
you.
okay. No, I just wanted to thank everybody who came. A number of you I've seen many times or heard from many times, so I'm very grateful to all of those comments. And I just wanted to provide, staff has heard those comments and has thought about a lot of these pieces, so I'll give you a couple of little technical bits of information and do with them what you will. But I just wanted to point out a few things. So first of all, motion sensing and dimming lights are actually not recommended by our police department, they were a partner throughout this whole process. Long story short, when things go on and off, you can lose your ability to see in the dark. And then it's also very easy, apparently, this is very much outside of my realm of knowledge, but it's very easy for somebody to kind of hide right outside of the dark area. The light goes off and then they know where that lighting is. So that's not something that they recommend doing. So just for whatever that's worth. And also, in general, to do a dimming or a motion sensing on a system, it takes a full upgrade of the system. It's not always something you can add on, afterwards. I also, to that point, just want to say, we gave a fair amount of thought to this tiered amortization option with an eye toward making it possible for as much fairness as we could, right? And so, for the request to try to find that low-hanging fruit, we totally empathize with that. But as Commissioner Krantz has just shown, that is a great solution, but only if you have that type of light. So people, for example, commercial and residential who have adopted LED packs, which has, of course, been the vogue thing to do for energy and cost reduction, that is often something you can't replace without replacing your whole fixture. So again, we tried to do it so that it wasn't piecemeal, so that we didn't say, well, all you have to do is pop a fixture on and then you're good for 3 years, because that actually triggers a very wide array of needs and responses and demands in a way that we didn't totally feel could be fairly done, right? So I just wanted to share that, and then just to reiterate that all of our numbers are estimates. We've tried to include labor wherever we can, again, to try to give you an accurate picture of what that might look like for the average person. But again, much gratitude to all the comments that we heard, and I just wanted to provide that information for you all.
Thank you very much. With that, then, anybody else? I will now close the public hearing, and the planning commissioners will deliberate on the evidence presented. During deliberations, no further public comment or other testimony or evidence will be received. Who would like to begin? Don't make me call on somebody again.
I'll go first.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Howell.
I think I like the changes that were made. So thank you for going back and listening to what was said and changing some of those. I think the amortization gets a little bit convoluted. I like some of the things that I said last time, but I think option 2 is probably a better alternative. And with the changes with the 25%, I think that is appropriate. I think this proposal allows us to do what we can as a small town. I think that's probably one of the most important things that we should strive for. Because other people aren't doing it or because they can't is not our problem or our aspiration. I think we should try to do what we can, and this is right up our alley. And maybe this makes it easier because we're a small town. I think the biggest concern that I have is to balance the cost versus the value, especially when I read public comments from business owners and commercial buildings. I think there have been some concerns about safety, and I am sympathetic to those businesses. I get that bad feeling every time I hear about one of those things happening. So I am sympathetic to that and wonder how this will impact the safety of some of these commercial buildings. So I almost think that there should be some kind of I just think we need to listen to the commercial owners, commercial building owners, and be very sympathetic to that. If we do this right, however, I think we can be a role model for other communities, and they can build on what we're doing to hopefully do the same thing, and maybe it'll be a rolling snowball. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Howe. Commissioner Moline?
Yeah, I'm going to be generally in support of this as well. I want to thank again the staff for a lot of work, and I appreciate that the community has put in a lot of time, and I wanted to just call out our outreach effort and the fact that we've involved that outreach effort to inform what we've come up with and proposed here. So I feel good about this. I'm sorry I missed the last meeting, but one of the things that I sort of feel strongly about is that we do the kind of that right-sized effort for these kinds of issues. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that other people were aware of, and I was aware of because of some coworkers of mine, we live in a place where there's a lot of artificial light. So to the tune of 943% brighter than the natural night sky. And so I'm excited that we're proposing an effort that is, I feel like sort of meets where we're at, and that we're not overdoing something and overburdening our residents, costing more money for budget items, for city budget items. I feel like we've really hit the right spot here. So I'm excited about this. We were talking about, how are there more technologies that can be used to kind of address some of these issues? And to me, is AI something that could help us as we move forward in the future, that could be something that could help minimize lighting impacts. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you very much. Moving down the line, I suppose.
Oh, I'm in strong support of a dark sky ordinance. I think it's long overdue, so I'm excited about that. I am confused, and I'm sorry I didn't catch this with the staff question, so I don't know if I can ask it of the commission. The current option 2, doesn't it say 25% addition?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I find this slide is, this was what was in our initial discussion on July 13th.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Just want to make sure that we all know what we're voting on. So I have concerns about small business, large business, the burden that they will have with 25% compliance. And ironically, I was the one that was asking staff to go in the other direction. So I apologize, but I've spent the past month interviewing people and having a lot of discussions and trying to get my head around what is the right balance to bring forward. So I'm not going to make the proposal just yet, but I did want to see if there was a reaction from the commission in terms of is 25% the right threshold?
Why don't we discuss that now, and then we'll get to your thoughts in just a moment. Commissioner Krantz, thoughts on threshold?
Commissioner Basket, can you speak just a little bit more about describing those, how that this would lead to more impacts than you had anticipated, maybe, or?
So if we are saying that a business changes Amanda gave a great example with 25%, say it's 104 exterior walls that make a modification to. So that is more likely with a facade improvement that perhaps you would trigger that for all of your building. Whereas with a 50% threshold, it's 50% of the exterior or a 50% addition to the building. That's a big difference in investment that a business might do.
Can you build on what you would recommend to adjust the current proposal as? Would you go for 50%? Would you limit that to commercial buildings?
What I'm suggesting is that we say, now I'm going to get myself confused on which direction. I know what, the direction I want to do is to make it less onerous for business. So some percentage, as we see on the slide here, revised commercial and residential alteration down to 25% from 50. That's a pretty quick trigger. So I am wondering if we should go in the other direction. And I wish that I knew more about what City Council is thinking on this, because I do want to send them a good ordinance that they will adopt and not have to soul search, because we've done the soul searching around this. So
So perhaps somewhere between 26% and 50%.
Perhaps.
Is your thought?
Yes, 30%
Okay.
is in there somewhere.
All right. Any other thoughts on this? I'm still, I'd be comfortable with something somewhere in between. I mean, 50% to me is a no-brainer. Like, yeah, if you're going to be doing 50%, at that point, you've got a budget large enough that you can absorb this, generally speaking. And I guess part of the concern with as low as 25%, would that potentially have a situation where it was cost prohibitive to do a refresh on some property that hadn't been occupied for a couple of years and really needed it? Numbers are numbers. I don't think there's a solid case to be made with data to argue that something is a particularly right number. So, Commissioner Grants.
Yeah, if I was remembering correctly, at 25%, that would have triggered, since 2018, only 20 commercial properties to have to come into compliance. And that doesn't seem like a lot. And I also just want to remind us that right now, and I don't know how this will go into the future, PACE discounts are just about 50% off of the cost. So that might give some incentives for taking care of this sooner rather than later. So I don't know that, I mean, maybe if somebody's thinking of an addition or something like that, they would consider doing it sooner to take it, or even if it's that expensive, they could consider the PACE rebates as part of their decision of making an addition. So yeah, I don't think that I'm in favor of keeping it at 25%.
Other thoughts on 25?
I might be forgetting, is there a waiver request available? I can't remember how we.
There's a waiver
There is
permitted,
one,
yeah.
yeah. So if somebody, I'm I guess thinking out loud here just a little bit. If somebody felt that the way the ordinance played out with their particular improvement proposal, they could, and it was something that was really going to be impactful to them, they could request a waiver.
So yes.
And it
that
would
is
have
part of it,
to
yeah.
meet
That is
those
part of it,
waiver
yeah.
criteria.
Commissioner Besk, any thoughts on waiver as an allowance for
Yeah.
the lower number, or is kind of what I'm
Well, that
thinking here?
provides flexibility. It creates more ambiguity for staff to work through.
Commissioner Howe, any additional thoughts on 25%, 26%, 50%?
I hear 33%.
Well, I guess if you're going to be updating the building, this would add value to that update. Even if you were doing 25%, let's say you're going to do a facade in the front, boy, it would be nice to do dark sky compliant for that too. You'd have to do dark sky compliant for everything though. So does that de-incentivize renovation of commercial buildings? I would argue that it would.
Potentially, with the possibility of a waiver. Yeah. Okay, hearing no additional thoughts right now on this, why don't we let you have closing thoughts, current thoughts, and we can.
Yeah, I can't go without saying that I'm like buzzing with appreciation for the comment from B City and the antenna. But I really appreciate all the work that and all the discussion that happened at the last meeting that I did not attend. Thinking about this a lot, I really want to see things coming into compliance sooner, and it was my understanding from watching the city council video. I know that the video speaks a lot more than the summary, and it was a little bit ambiguous, but I felt like there was direction to come up with an amortization period. But given all the discussion yesterday, I would like to recommend that we have a deadline for compliance only for residential. And I know that's kind of jumping past what was discussed at the last meeting, but I don't think, looking at the community survey and the public support for a residential compliance, and I think that would be something that we could do.
Thank you. I'm excited by this. I think this is a good first step forward. I think this is actually a great place to start better community understanding of what it is and isn't. And I would actually, on that, back to that whole education beginning kind of right now, last month, dark sky is not about dark places. So there were a number of people who were concerned about safety concerns, and it's really not about that. In fact, there's a very nice synchronous area where it crosses over. Dark sky, these regulations do discourage the creation of these sharp lines of the dark shadow area and then the bright area, that close adjacencies. So that's actually just good lighting plan. So yeah, it's not about lack of safety by any means. And then also, yeah, the previous discussion about curfews and that sort of thing, that's also not a dark sky issue unto itself. I just want to make sure that people kind of understand what this is and isn't at times. I'm comfortable with it as currently proposed. I'm also comfortable with the change if people felt strongly about that. I guess I am softened in the need for that change because there is the waiver allowance. And while it's a challenge to administer even the waiver allowance, at least it's there. And I do think it's doable when it comes to weighing potential benefit from facade improvements. And at that point, it would be easy for a project to have a cost associated with the lighting upgrades at that point. I would think it would be fairly easy to make a claim for waiver if appropriate, if needed by the property owner. So, additional thoughts?
Yeah, I have one more change I wouldn't mind seeing in the ordinance, which is regarding the exception for string lights, because those seem to be the most obvious light polluters when I go out in the residential neighborhoods, and they can be made dark sky compliant. They do sell adapters that you can put on each, like for a dollar a piece, you can put something that wraps around the top to make them pretty colors and to make them not glow upward. So I'd like to propose that the exception for string lights be eliminated.
For street lights?
Sorry, string lights or party lights.
Lights. Oh, string lights. Got it. Any additional reactions to that?
Commissioner Krantz, can you lead us to that section of the ordinance, draft ordinance?
I can help if you want me to. Under the original report, if you have it, it's under discussion, where it talks about all three drafts include. It was in the original report, July 13th, it was 4 out of 64. So if it's the, I don't know if it's on today's.
Yeah, so I'm wondering where it is in the proposed ordinance, where what you're suggesting would need a change in the proposed ordinance. Maybe is it in the exception?
Chair, would you
Sure,
mind?
yeah, if you can help us.
Sorry, yeah, absolutely. So in the report, it says exceptions for string party lights. It also separately says holiday lights. So those, I'm not sure which you're referring to, but I'm guessing the string lights based on what you said. So this string lighting is not fully accepted. It's sort of similar conceptually to the downtown trespass piece that we talked about earlier. So string lighting would be the kind that people have around their decks and such. If this were passed, it would be subject to a curfew of 11 p.m. and then it would also need to be around what we call activity, I think human activity areas. So, for example, this specifically would not allow things like lighting around your fence, which is pretty common, right? Because that's sort of, you see people do their whole fence line, but you could have it on your deck, or you could have it if you have a patio, right? So there's a little bit of interpretation that would need to go on in an enforcement situation, but that's how it's accepted. So, and up to a max lumen. So if you have something, I don't remember off the top of my head, I certainly can look, but I think it's 80 lumens in residential and 180 in commercial. Anything that or below could be on, unshielded, up until 11 or closing of activities, and it would also need to be in those activity areas.
So thank you for that. It's
Thank
not
you.
new evidence, that's just what's in there. Thank you for highlighting it. I'm comfortable with it as written at that point with those, knowing
Okay.
that those requirements are part of the exception, the 11 o'clock curfew in particular, and the activity areas.
Yeah,
Curious
me
what
too. It was I apologize. It was my misunderstanding of how I read the exception.
Any additional thoughts, deliberations? Or shall we move ahead with a motion, please?
I would move approval.
Resolution 14, Series 2023, recommending approval of an ordinance amending Title 17 of the Louisville Municipal Code to adopt a new outdoor lighting code that includes standards and guidelines for all outdoor lights in the city.
That's it. That's the thing.
Then do we have to specify
As
the
presented, option
and-
2,
Yes.
as presented to us here on August 10th, 2023, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Howe,
Yes.
Commissioner Moline,
Yes.
Commissioner Basket,
Yes?
Commissioner Krantz,
Yes.
Chair Brown Eyes.
Yes. Again, thank you for all of your work on this. Motion carries. Planning Commission comments for this evening. I would like to recognize Jeff Hurt, our new planning manager, if I can almost read that title from here. Yes. Thank you for being here. I also want to recognize the first time in the last 12 years that we've been able to have somebody participate using sign language in our hearing. I think that's really great. So, any additional planning commission comments? Seeing none, yes?
No,
Commissioner
mine
Basket?
is an easy request, I think, but additional work for staff. Could you let us know when this is going to go to council? Is it,
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
would you please let us know when it's scheduled for council? The dark
Yeah,
sky ordinance?
yes, absolutely. Happy
Thank
to do
you.
that. Mhm.
Great, thank you. Staff comments?
I think we're scheduled for the September 2nd Thursday usual meeting. I don't know if we have any items, but we'll hold it for now. And I don't think we have any other comments.
Great. Yes, currently none scheduled. We'll see what happens between then and now. A motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.